Welcome to Relanza, the podcast that connects you with expert voices on the most innovative topics in language education. I'm Mercedes Querol from the Universidad Internacional de La Rioja and the coordinator of this space. Don't miss it. Relanza starts right now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast of Relanza. My name is Darío Banegas, and today we will be talking about social justice in the language curriculum. And we have the pleasure of having Deniz Ortactepe Hart from the University of Glasgow. Hello, Deniz.
Hi.
It's
Thanks
a pleasure
for having
to
me.
have you here. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for being part of Relanza. And let me start by asking just my first question, which is about yourself. So, could you tell us maybe three things you would like people to know about yourself?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm a lecturer in the TESOL programs at the University of Glasgow, and this is my third year at the University of Glasgow. But I have 14 years of experience in the field. I recently transitioned from the United States to the UK due to personal reasons. So I've worked in the United States and also in Turkey before coming to the UK. I identify myself as an ethnic minority in this country and in this state as a woman of color, as these two contexts have different labels or categorizations for people like myself who are not white and who are different and who are from a different country. And by different, I mean a non-European country or a country from the global south. I work on social justice, language education, teacher education, identity, reflection, and intersectionality and neoliberalism. But I think those things we'll be probably speaking a bit more about in your next questions. Yeah. So this is me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Deniz. And when we thought about social justice, we thought instantly about your name. And because your work often highlights the relationship between language education and social justice. And so, my second question for you is, how do you conceptualize social justice in the context of language curriculum design? And maybe connected to that, why is it essential in today's educational landscapes?
Okay, so
I know that's it's a long question, and it will deserve a very long answer. But I'm sure that you will be able to give us some highlights.
yeah. Like I'm not sure if I can answer that in 20 minutes, but I'll do my best to do that. So to get started with social justice, is a very loose concept. People define social justice in different ways, and there's actually backlash as well. Like, some people don't like the word social justice, and they say, like, let's call it what it is. Like, if it's anti-racism, let's call it anti-racism or decolonization. But I kind of see social justice as a more holistic term to cover all of that, because anti-racism doesn't really address LGBTQ plus issues or um, or feminism, although there's a lot of overlap between these different areas, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well in my definition. Um, but but coming to the definition, or like how I understand social justice, and again, there are different ways to think about social justice. People talk about self-identity awareness, equity, equality, care, respect, learning and working with students in the context of education. Some people talk about multiculturalism, multilingualism. Some people talk about racism in relation to social justice, or classism, ableism, genderism, and you name it, so on and so forth. The way that I look at social justice is more like an amalgam, like a combination of all of these things. Like on the one hand, it is really about respect and esteem and identity and belonging. So when we think about race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, that's one aspect of social justice. But there is the other aspect, which is more structural and more institutional. So thinking about neoliberalism or
Yeah.
neo-nationalism, thinking about social class. Um, so I see that it's not just social justice is not just about interpersonal issues, but it also addresses, or it has to address, institutional and structural issues as well. And I see intersectionality to be at the core of social justice. And what I mean by intersectionality is that, when I introduce myself to you in the first question, I talked about, being a woman of color, like the way that I'm not just that a woman, but I'm also like, I look different from most of the people in this country, and that puts me in a different position uh, than just being a woman versus just being an ethnic minority. My experiences as a woman of color will be different from a white woman or yeah or I'm sure you know what I mean. So
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely.
there
Yes.
are different identity categories in terms of where we are, like ability is one of them, neurodiversity is another, like gender, race, ethnicity, class, nationality, sexual identity is another. So depending on how we are situated in relation to these identity categories, our life experiences, and the way that people see us and approach us, and the way that we might experience oppression, or we might be on the other side, we might be oppressing other people, even when we intentionally or unintentionally. So intersectionality is an important lens to understand social justice in that sense, that and also because that depending on our many identities, that that's what I said, the distinction between being an oppressor and being oppressed might, we might be doing both at the same time, again, like knowingly or without knowing. Yeah. So that's like thinking about going back to, I think, maybe your second half of the question, that why is it important in the context of language education. It is very important because um, I think about, when I think about social justice and language education, I think about three questions. And the first question is, how does language itself lead to inequalities and injustices, not only in the language classroom, but also in schools and beyond? And then the second question is, how does language education lead to inequalities and injustices in schools and in our societies? And then the third question is, how can we transform language education in a way that dismantles these structural inequalities and create a more equitable and inclusive environment for our learners? So the way that I think about social justice in the language, in the language curriculum, is more about creating equitable and inclusive education by examining issues of race, diversity, gender, age, class, ability, gender, sexuality from a critical but also intersectional perspective that takes into account structural issues such as neoliberalism, nationalism, and so on. And while doing that, it's also important to cultivate a sense of empowerment and advocacy and activism and work towards social change. Yeah, I don't know if I managed to answer all of.
I think you have, because if we think about, yes, like language education and the language curriculum, then the curriculum becomes a tool that can potentially perpetuate inequities. But then what we want to do through social justice is to make the language curriculum, make it a tool for interrupting those inequities. And as you said, as you just said, to make it work towards activism and advocacy. And maybe, in relation to perhaps the three questions that you put forward and what happens in practice, we know that sometimes language teachers face institutional constraints when trying to embed social justice principles in their curriculum. And so when teachers have to navigate such tensions, what strategies or entry points would you recommend for practitioners working within perhaps rigid or standardized systems, or perhaps systems that are too hierarchical and they might not have much agency or room for social justice?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And like, whenever I talk about my research and the projects that I do, or just like, oh, I work on social justice language education, people ask like, oh, what does social justice have to do with language education? And the answer often is that a lot. So the first of all, like, to answer your question, I don't see like social justice as something that we bring to the classroom. It's there. It's embedded in every human interaction. It's embedded in our societies, in our institutions. Um, so some teachers, for instance, yeah, as you said, oh, I have this rigid curriculum. I don't have time to or flexibility to integrate these issues. Again, my reaction is that it's already there. Maybe you are not teaching towards social justice, but the curriculum, like everything involved in the curriculum, the materials assessment, etc., they perpetuate inequalities. So whether you like it or not, or whether we admit it or not, social justice is already there, and either we are working towards social justice or we are perpetuating inequalities and injustices. So that's that. So social justice to me is like a philosophy that you go into the classroom and it's already there, and and it's up to the teacher to whether to take a stance or to maintain the status quo. So that's my first reaction to these kind of questions. So thinking about then, if you have a rigid curriculum, um, and how do you go about addressing the issues? And as I said, because the curriculum itself, because it's designed in such a way that, or we in terms of critical pedagogy, we talk about the hidden curriculum, and the hidden curriculum might be, and oftentimes does, perpetuate inequalities, right? Thinking about the images that are conveyed in textbooks, or thinking about the assessments, and thinking about high stakes tests, and thinking about the interactions that we have with the students. Oftentimes the way that teachers position themselves as the authority, standing in front of the whole class, that itself is a social justice issue, because you are positioning yourself as the authority, and you are assuming that the students don't know anything and they are just, tabula rasa and, empty blanks, no, empty, yeah, empty vessels, not,
Or blank slates, yeah.
yeah. um, so, and that's a social justice issue in and of itself, and the language itself is a, social justice issue. Like thinking about if you're teaching, um, you know, um, a typical quote unquote, like, mother and father family, or like thinking about the pronouns and thinking about um, language that perpetuate, gender differences or gender or binary language around gender, like in terms of thinking about like he and she and the way that we use they these days to promote gender neutral language. So all of these things are already in the curriculum, and um, these are things that the teachers deal with on a day-to-day basis. So even when you have a rigid curriculum, um, you know these are the materials, let's say, that you deal with. And I think maybe um, one strategy, uh, if you may call it a strategy, because I think to me it's not really a strategy, but one framework that's really helpful is critical literacy. And critical literacy is looking at materials, all kinds of materials, not just visual oral, but multimodal text as well, from a critical angle, and thinking about what's happening here, who's promoted, what kind of language is promoted. For instance, if you're looking at professions, like who is doing what and what kind of language that are you teaching? Are you using waitress on an actress and businessman, or are you using a gender neutral language? So it's actually not from a critical from the lens of critical literacy. It's not actually that difficult um, to address social justice issues in your materials, because yes, you have to use that material, but it's more about the questions that you ask to the students rather than doing something additional. Like you don't have to design a new text, or you don't have to bring in any new materials, images, and etc. You could address, like, social justice issues by just working with the material that you have, but by asking the right questions in terms of getting students to understand what's happening, who is portrayed, who is silenced, who is represented as doing what. And those kinds of questions actually help a lot in terms of developing students' critical literacy, but also critical consciousness. Um, the the other example that I can give in terms of, I think you asked for a point of entry,
Yes.
and point of entry is the one typical example that I give in terms of point of entry. Well, I think thinking about critical literacy, asking critical questions could be a point of entry. But another point of entry is if you can support your materials with additional um, resources. Then one point of entry that I often give as an example of is thinking about the royal family. For instance, the royal family is super popular across all textbooks. I don't know why, but like, look at all the British, like UK based, like um, textbooks that are circulated all around the world, and you'll find the royal family, and like historically. So, and like, I had the example of this royal wedding, like, Kate Middleton and Prince William, and like who attended the wedding, and etc. and etc. And then around the same time, I think, I was designing these materials. What happened is that there in the newspapers there was this article. Well, not just one article. It was across different, newspapers. Like, Independent, Daily Star, all kinds of, like, and they all like talked about the same thing, that Princess Charlotte. By the way, like, I am the least person to talk about royal family, because I don't know like who is who really. Like, I couldn't be less interested in the royal family. So Princess Charlotte, who apparently is the daughter of Prince William and Kate Middleton, can speak two languages, because it's yeah, like, amazing. She's only two, and like she can speak two languages, and it was a big deal, and it was all over the news. And so then, like, if you are teaching the royal family, because you are stuck with that textbook, but you're also following the news, and and you come across something related to what you teach, I think you can easily address issues around like immigration and bilingualism, and why, like someone as privileged as Princess Charlotte, speaking two languages because she has a Spanish nanny, is a big deal, while the country has, anti-immigration laws, and doing everything in their power to to prevent immigration, and their and multilingualism is still, not seen as an asset, but something that, oh, that, yeah, like all those things around, being a non-native speaker, like, because we are speaking another language, we're in a position of deficit. But when it's, Princess Charlotte, she's not a non-native speaker of Spanish, in that case. So if she was to speak 10 languages at the age of 2, this could have been news material. But yeah, so so you can, like, you can take your own materials, and then, if you're, I think this is still, to me, related to critical literacy, because looking at news articles, and again, like, about who is doing what, like, why is it a big deal for, like, for Princess Charlotte to be speaking 2 languages, when, multilingualism is the norm in many countries in the global south, right? So I think I'll stop here.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you so much, Deniz, for your time and for your insights. It's been a pleasure. And thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dario. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you. And folks, if you have been listening attentively to this podcast, you know that you will also find activities to work on it. And remember to also engage with the other podcasts, which are part of Relanza. Bye for now.
Relanza is a project funded by the Directorate for Knowledge Transfer at UNIR and developed in collaboration with the Prodigy Research Group and the Language Curriculum SIG of the British Association for Applied Linguistics. Don't forget to visit our website to learn more about this topic and to find ideas for your lessons.